Welcome to A Course in Miracles, where you'll discover health and well-being through inner peace. Your host is Eloisa Ramos, EFT master and author of Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. Using EFT, the Ramos clearing technique, and the principles of A Course in Miracles, you'll learn how to open your mind to healing and to all that is inherently yours: deep fulfillment, vitality, joy, and inner peace.
Welcome to today's program, Forgiveness Definition with A Course in Miracles and EFT Tapping. My name is Eloisa Ramos, and I'm very happy to be with you and share this wonderful opportunity to explore what is forgiveness. This is the theme of lessons 221 to 230 of A Course in Miracles. We want to understand what the definition of forgiveness is, and also what is sin if forgiveness is the undoing of it. We want to explore our thinking and see what is happening in our mind when it forgives and when it does not forgive. So that's what our focus will be today. I will be using some examples from clients that I have worked with to illustrate some of the ideas of the forgiveness definition that A Course in Miracles teaches. We're also going to look at why forgiveness blocks healing and why it is in our best interest to forgive, but also why it can be difficult. One other thing I'd like to do today is invite any and all of the live listeners to this show to feel free to call in with questions, or even if there's a volunteer that would like to do some EFT tapping on a specific issue today on unforgiveness. I'm going to give the phone number you can call in. So if you're having difficulty forgiving someone, we can work together during the last half hour of the program. You can maintain anonymity by giving me a different name. And the phone number I'm going to give you is also the number that you can call to listen by phone anywhere when you're not at a computer. But keep in mind that it only works during the live show, which airs every Friday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time. And that should be good until at least the end of this year, December 2014. It would be wonderful if there's some volunteers or questions from the live listeners, and we can make the show more interactive. So here's a phone number you can write down. You can also keep it for future reference. It's area code 347-215-6833. And that was 347-215-6833. And once you're dialed in, if you want to volunteer or ask a question, all you need to do is press the number 1 on your phone, and then that will light up your phone number for me, and I will be able to see it on my computer screen. And then I can unmute your line when I'm ready to work with you. Okay, so I want to start by mentioning that with Lesson 221, we're starting Part 2 of the workbook for students of A Course in Miracles. And the emphasis now, as the introduction to Part 2 explains it, is, quote, "For now, we seek direct experience of truth alone. The lessons that remain are merely introductions to the times in which we leave the world of pain and go to enter peace," unquote. The direct experience that we're seeking is direct because it bypasses our conceptual mind. And the reason that I have tried to help you understand how our perception and conceptual mind works, and why what it is showing us is not truth with a TH, is that if we have no awareness of this and believe that the world of perception is showing us reality in truth, and we don't recognize that it is subjective and is using interpretation and comparison, we will not be open to direct experience of truth alone. We will think that what we believe and perceive with our physical senses is all there is. We're going to see that as reality. And why would we want to let that go and have an experience that bypasses reality? That can bring up a lot of fear. And of course, this would interfere with our receiving that direct experience. Yet it is important to have this experience, which goes beyond what meets the eyes, you could say, to understand that all is not as it seems. When we are identified and attached to believing that what we are perceiving is truth with a TH, that it's absolute, that it's a fact, without question, our mind is closed to the truth. In the introduction to What is Forgiveness, in A Course in Miracles, it points to this. It says, quote, "An unforgiving thought is one which makes a judgment that it will not raise to doubt, although it's not true. The mind is closed and will not be released." And often, that the judgment that it makes, that it will not question, that it will see as a fact, that it will see as beyond question, is a judgment. And it's often something that says, they hurt me, or I hurt them, or myself in some way. The idea is that the idea that we're accepting when we do this is that we have the power to hurt or kill life. And it's elevating our judgment to absolute truth. And our judgment cannot access absolute truth precisely because it's accessing subjective interpretation and inaccurate perceptions. Our perception is not 100% accurate. There's a lot of filters that come in when we bring in information perceptually, and our own programming and past experiences are giving it the meaning that it will have for us. That was what some of the first beginning lessons were pointing to. So I want to start with a couple of examples to illustrate this idea that the unforgiving thought is one which makes a judgment that it will not raise to doubt, although it's not true. There's a couple of people I worked with, and one of them, he was having a lot of difficulty taking her old and sick dog to the veterinary office because the dog needed to be put down. He could see that the dog was suffering and in pain, even with medication that the dog was being given. But the main problem here was that my client was feeling sorry for the dog's suffering and was convinced that he had caused it by failing to take care of him like he believed he should have. Okay, this was because my client was sick himself, and also because when he got the dog, he had not realized how much work was involved. So he was holding himself guilty, believing that his judgment that he did not take good care of the dog was a fact, and that somehow that was the cause of the dog's pain and suffering. So we tapped through a few things, and there was an event there in the past because he'd had other dogs when he was younger that had died, and with a lot of suffering too. But when we did the EF tapping to release the guilt, and then tapped on how the dog could have been taken better care of by someone else, because that was a possibility. On the other hand, the dog could have been adopted by someone else that could have neglected the dog and maybe not taken care of the dog as well as my client had. So because the truth was, my client loved the dog. Excuse me. And if he had not adopted him, it was possible that someone else could have taken care of him, but it was also possible that it could have been someone that would not have cared for the dog as well as he had. And that was a possibility that my client had not accessed, because once he made the judgment, he was not questioning it. He saw it as truth with a TH. Okay, I also work with another client, and she had difficulty connecting emotionally to her past. She was holding her parents guilty for this difficulty because growing up, instead of supporting her emotionally when she needed it most, they yelled, judged, and blamed him instead. She called her interpretation and judgment that her parents' lack of emotional support damaged him a fact. Damaged her a fact, and felt disgusted with her parents that they would treat a young girl that way. This was despite understanding that her parents were not capable of offering emotional support because that's how they were raised, and they did not know better. We tapped on releasing the disgust, and she was able to accept responsibility for the story she had been telling about herself under this situation with her parents. Without the disgust, she was able to withdraw her judgment, and that allowed her to see that this had not been real, that it was a story that she had been telling about herself and her parents. So something very interesting happens in our mind when we feel or believe that someone has hurt us or will hurt us. What happens is that fear shows up, and often our survival instincts kick in, and the primitive mind takes over. And its primary purpose then becomes to find the cause of the danger, to find the attacker, basically. Unforgiveness is directed by this primitive mind because it confirms that we have been hurt or done wrong, and it supports the idea that we can be hurt, and then judgment points the finger and identifies the cause or the perpetrator. Now, this can actually bring a temporary feeling of safety because we think the threat has been identified, and we can now take measures to defend or protect ourselves. So when I do the Ramos clearing technique, I always check to see if something is bad or unsafe to let go. And sometimes there's blocks to letting it go. And the blocks that I find most often is fear and unforgiveness. Every once in a while there's trauma. So you can see that when we look at safety issues, the mind can actually believe that that forgiveness can make a person weak, and that unforgiveness can actually help protect safety. And that will need to be released, because it's not very easy to let go of something that you believe is actually protecting you, especially if your body's in survival mode. And of course, that means that we are, completely identified, attached to the idea that we are a body, an ego body. So the problem is that, for example, with my first client, there was no real way for her to know with certainty what the cause of his dog's suffering was. And so the mind, because it doesn't know for sure, and not even the vet could really tell her with certainty what was wrong with his dog, that uncertainty can also be very fearful, because when you're in a survival mode, it's imperative to identify the safety, because then you know where to direct your defenses. You cannot protect yourself if you do not know who or what the enemy is or where it's coming from. So our judgment comes in and points the finger, and it's often by default. It's not because we really know the cause. It just so happened that that happened to have taken place at the same time, or it's like the cause is assumed to be something that's associated with the event, or at the same level of the effect. So, okay, and of course, a problem with a judgment is that it's working off of unquestioned assumptions, beliefs, and interpretations. It's working off what we have learned in our past and the unhealed traumas that are still there, bringing up fears. So it's very important to question these assumptions, because you can begin to see things differently, and then forgiveness can be easier, because the mind is now open to other explanations and other possibilities, because you've let go of the safety problem. And so before you have seen that your interpretation is subjective and not absolute truth. So the mind now can see that there was no sin. Okay, so from page 401 of the workbook, it's saying that the sin or what my brother did not really occur, because the mind has released the judgment, and therefore there is no sin. In order for there to be sin, there needs to be judgment. There needs to be a condemnation. There needs to be a decision that someone is guilty. And so what is sin? This is actually a theme that's going to come up in a few weeks. But for now, let's address what A Course in Miracles says here in the introduction to What is Forgiveness. Quote, "What is sin except a false idea about God's Son?" Unquote. So sin is basically a false idea or a misperception that misses the mark because it is not true perception. It is not in alignment with truth. True perception, or Christ's vision, would show us only the innocence of the Son of God, of which we are all a part of. A Course in Miracles is distinguishing forgiveness from pardoning. And it's interesting because in the Spanish language, there are not two words for forgiveness. There's just one, and it's perdón, which is basically pardoning. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So in pardoning, the judgment or condemnation remains. So the sin is still there. An example would be when the President of the United States grants a presidential pardon to a convicted person at the end of the president's term in office. So the president has the power to do that when he's about ready to leave office, and several presidents have exercised that in the past. And so when he gives this pardon, he's not voiding the conviction. He's simply pardoning the punishment. He's saying, okay, you're free now. Whatever sentence you had as punishment, you no longer have to continue with that. So if I forgive someone for humiliating my ego, and I decide to let go of the revenge, okay, I may not have forgiven truly, because if I'm still believing they are guilty of having hurt me, I'm still holding that judgment and believing that the humiliation came from them